If you've been watching some of the things we said in the last year or so, we introduced you to an important development in the Mediterranean called the EastMed pipeline. The EastMed pipeline. Just briefly, Israel and Cyprus and Egypt since that time have discovered huge quantities of natural gas in the eastern Mediterranean Sea. Very, very significant. Not only geopolitically, but I believe prophetically very significant. So they've discovered these large quantities of natural gas, and by the way, the world is moving away from oil to natural gas. Right. Natural gas is the desired energy source. So what you have is a huge pocket, and there's probably much more to be discovered in the eastern Mediterranean and off of Israel's territorial waters and southern Cyprus. Now when I say southern Cyprus, it's Cyprus. There's a northern Cyprus that was taken over or conquered by Turkey. In other words, there was a war, if you will, a battle that took place. Turkey swooped in, I think it was 1974, swooped into Cyprus and took about 35 to 40% of the island of Cyprus, so that Turkey now controls it. They've unilaterally, since that point, said it's called the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. And so now Turkey controls, no other nation in the world recognizes it as a legitimate country. But Turkey has unilaterally said it's a nation on about 40% of northern Cyprus. That is very significant as it relates to the future and what's going to be developing in the Mediterranean, because it goes to the issue of who controls the rights to explore in the sea, in the Mediterranean Sea, for natural gas. We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars worth of wealth in the natural gas that is contained in the Mediterranean Sea. So, when Israel discovered, and Cyprus jointly sometimes, which the southern portion of Cyprus, which is Greek-controlled, okay? So remember, Greece and Turkey hate each other with a passion. They have through the years. So you have an island that they're essentially sharing, okay? So Greece, the Grecian part of Cyprus, in joint work with Israel and then also Egypt in the mix, discovered significant quantities of this natural gas. Now the issue is, how do you get the natural gas to market? How do you get it to market? What do you do to move that natural gas to market? So Israel, the logical option would be, well, since Turkey is a natural gas and energy hub in the world, and they've declared themselves that, very significant, don't forget that. Turkey has declared themselves to be an energy hub in the world. And that is very significant. Why? Because they're going to control the switches where the energy flow goes. Remember, Turkey has ambitions to revive its Ottoman Empire. It's doing it all over the Middle East. If I had time, I could take another hour to tell you all the locations where Turkey is having significant influence in the Middle East, because they have ambitions to take over exactly the way the areas that they ruled during the Ottoman Turkish Empire, which is most of the Middle East, okay? And that's very significant prophetically. So you have this natural gas. How are you going to get it to market? Well, one way for Israel would be to send it up to Turkey through some kind of a pipeline, or ship it up, and to have Turkey send it off through Turkey's existing pipelines to Europe, right? Except that Turkey and Israel, their relations have been souring very quickly because the leader of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdowan, has been saying all kinds of vitriolic things against Israel, against the Jews, against Prime Minister Netanyahu, supporting the Palestinian cause. Turkey is going rogue. The fact that they're still NATO is kind of shocking, because they have been doing everything to counter America, Israel, and all of our allies. So watch Turkey. Actually, I would suggest to you to watch Turkey as much as you're watching Iran. Because Turkey is in a much better geopolitical location, geographic position. Economically, they're stronger. They have warm water ports in the Mediterranean, and they are a buffer between the Middle East and Russia. So there's a lot of significance to Turkey. Watch Turkey very carefully. But Israel has already done a deal to move some of their natural gas down to Egypt to a liquefaction plant. Egypt has liquid natural gas plant where they can take that natural gas, liquefy it, and then ship it off to other parts of the world. So Israel has a multi-billion-dollar deal with Egypt, and also Israel has a multi-billion-dollar deal with Jordan to supply Jordan with natural gas as well. So Israel is reaping very significant benefits to its discovery of natural gas in the eastern Mediterranean. and stands to make a whole lot more through the EastMed pipeline project, which has been now in the works. It's not under construction, but it's a joint effort between Israel, Egypt, Cyprus, and Greece. So those nations are working together to develop an underwater pipeline, amazing technology, that would run from Israel's, this location in the Eastern Mediterranean, from their natural gas pipeline fields to Cyprus, with a pipeline to Crete, which is Greek, and from Crete to Greece, and from there to the tip of the heel, Brindisi in Italy, and then off to Europe. Now, why is this so important? Because the goal of those nations is to bypass Turkey. To bypass Turkey so that Turkey is not in the loop and doesn't control any of the levers of the natural gas. Why is that so important to Europe? Because Europe wants another alternative source of natural gas that doesn't run through an Arab or Russian nation. Remember, most of Europe's natural gas is coming from Russia. And Russia is clamoring not to lose its market share into Europe. And what happened is not just about money, it's about influence. When Russia does something that Europe doesn't like, for instance, like in the Ukraine or in the Crimea, and Europeans don't like it, they can't squeal too loud about what Russia's doing, because Russia can just turn off the tap, and then when it's the dead of winter, guess who doesn't have natural gas to turn heat on in Europe? All of the Europeans. So Russia, not only economically, but in terms of its influence, has a lot of power over Europe because of the natural gas that Russia has that it sends to Europe. So Europe is desperate to find alternative sources, reliable alternative sources of natural gas that doesn't run through Russia and that doesn't come through an Islamic country. And so this would be a very unique situation, and it would put Israel right in the center of the energy play in the world. And why do you think that there would be so many important reasons for the nations of the world to want to come up against Israel in the last days? Because Israel has a tremendous amount of wealth buried under the Mediterranean Sea in their natural gas deposits, and they are already reaping the benefits from it. So one quick development, and then I must close. They just signed, this was in the works now for a year and a half. They just signed, Israel, Cyprus, and Greece. They just signed an agreement, I think it was January 2nd, to move forward with the EastMed pipeline. I think $6 or $7 billion pipeline project. They just signed it to move forward. And guess what Turkey just did, which you probably didn't hear about. Turkey just signed an agreement with Libya over here. And you know what the agreement was that the world heard about, which was, well, Libya is in a civil war. Now, stick with me here. Libya is in a civil war. You have the main government in Tripoli trying to survive. And then you have another faction which is coming from the eastern portion of Libya, which is another force trying to tangle with the one in Tripoli, where the government headquarters are located. Both are pretty strong factions against each other. So what's interesting is that Turkey has said to the main government in Libya, in Tripoli, we'll send in troops. We'll support you. We've got your back. Don't worry, we'll support you. And guess who is supporting the other side, this other group that's coming against them in Libya from the east? Egypt and Russia are supporting this other group against the group in Tripoli, of which Turkey is aligned with. Now, it sounds so nice of Turkey to come to their rescue and say, hey, we'll support you, you know, we're gonna send some troops there, we've got your back. But there's a little caveat to the deal. And the caveat is that Turkey wants to create an economic zone in the Mediterranean Sea that's a diagonal line from Turkey all the way down right here to this eastern portion of Libya, so that they think legally say, we have a right to create an economic zone with no space in between Turkish economic areas in the Mediterranean and Libya's economic areas in the Mediterranean. And guess what they say can't happen for that EastMed pipeline? Can't go through there without our permission. Can't go through there without our permission. So that's what's developed as part of the deal that Turkey just did with Libya. Why? Because Turkey wants to control the world's energy coming out of the entire Middle East. As a matter of fact, Putin of Russia, just in the last few days, flew to Syria to talk about what's going on in Syria and Russian strategies in Syria with Bashar al-Assad, the head of Syria. And then Putin flew to meet with Erdowan, the president of Turkey, to dedicate a new natural gas pipeline that Russia and Turkey have been working on. And that gas pipeline goes from Russia across the Black Sea just to the northwest of Istanbul. It's called the Turk Stream pipeline. And that pipeline is going to take Russian natural gas to the hub of energy in the Middle East, Turkey. And from Turkey, it's going to go into Bulgaria, Serbia, Hungary, and off to Europe. So what is Russia trying to do? Since they're having problems in Ukraine and they can't get their pipelines activated running through Ukraine because of problems in Ukraine, they're going around Ukraine with this new pipeline called Turk Stream, which comes from Russia to Turkey and then goes into Europe. It gives Turkey the lever to control the natural gas to Europe. Okay? It gives Turkey the lever. So do you think that Russia and Turkey are happy about this other development here with this EastMed pipeline going from Israel, of all places, and Cyprus to Greece and on to Europe? They're not happy about it at all. So do you think that it's possible that that might give justification in the last days for Turkey to come down through the Mediterranean with a fleet of ships and maybe to attack Egypt, which is its sworn enemy, and to go into Israel? This is exactly what the Bible tells us. This is exactly what the Bible describes. When the Antichrist takes power, and I believe he'll take power up in this region with a merging of Turkey and Iran at some point in the future, the Antichrist will come out of what is known as the former Assyrian Empire. He will come out of this region most likely. And the Bible tells us that he will bring in the last days, he will come with a great fleet of ships south. He will enter Egypt. He will conquer Egypt. And he will also, it says, and Libya and Ethiopia will be at his steps. In other words, will be under his dominion, his power, his influence. And it's describing the tribal areas in the text in Ezekiel 38. It's describing him coming from this area, Meshach, Tubal, to Garma. These are tribal areas that are in Turkey today. So what you are seeing, folks, I want to tell you, you are seeing the pieces on the chessboard coming into place before your very eyes. I'm not saying that all this is going to transpire in the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, or 50 years. But if you ask me, I think we are getting very close to the last days. You're seeing the pieces on the board coming into play. And I'll throw one more thing at you. When the Antichrist is described in Scripture as coming down into this area of Egypt, he says he enters the beautiful land, Israel, and he sets up his headquarters, a tabernacle, if you will, a headquarters in Jerusalem on the Holy Mountain. This is exactly what the Bible describes. So when all of this is transpiring, what is being said in the text of Ezekiel? You'll read a very interesting verse. It says, Sheba and Dedan, just stick with me, Sheba and Dedan say, when they see the invasion coming down into this area, are you coming to take a spoil, wealth, and to take a prey? Who is Sheba and Dedan? Arabia. Arabia. So in the text in Ezekiel 38, when you're reading about this invasion taking place, coming down, with the Antichrist coming down into Egypt, taking a spoil, taking a prey, entering the beautiful land, setting up his tabernacle in Jerusalem. Sheba and Dedan down here, and the ships of Tarshish, ships from faraway places, who are probably on the Red Sea trade route, are saying, are you coming down to take a spoil and to take a prey, to steal the wealth of the Middle East? Amazing scenario. And that's a story for another day, because Arabia in this particular conquest is not conquered. Arabia survives for another day, a short distance later in the last days, and I believe that Arabia will be judged a special judgment is in store for Arabia by God, but that's a whole other message series. But I want you to understand that the movement of these events, the shaping of these things that are transpiring is bringing us to the edge. How far away we are. We're getting very close to the last days, and you should be aware, Christians should be aware, that we're not just talking pie in the sky. There are real developments taking place that are moving us rapidly towards the last days. And I hope you're paying attention. I hope it encourages you to dig into your Bible. Dig into those Old Testament prophets. Dig into Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Daniel. Try to learn it, wrestle with it, and ask the Lord to help you to understand. And study it so that when you're looking at these things, you have an idea of where things are moving to, right? It will give you a passion and a boldness to share your faith with others and to be an influence in your communities. We don't know what America's role is going to be in the last days. Everybody asks that question. I ask that question. I think about it a lot. There are really two schools of thought, and I won't get into too much detail except to say there are two schools of thought as it relates to America and the wider impact of the Antichrist in the last days. I've been raised to think and have studied and through the years have believed that the influence of the coming Antichrist, that individual who will rise to power and will demand that people bow down and worship, take his mark, they can't buy or sell unless... The thinking through the years by most Christians is that he has universal worldwide power. And that means we ask the question, okay, then what does that mean for us living in the West? What does that mean for us living in America? Will we not be able to buy or sell unless we take that mark under pressure? And if we do, I believe we're eternally separated from God. It's hard to even comprehend the impact of it. Conversely, there are some who believe, and I'm on the fence right now about it honestly, that the influence of the Antichrist will be primarily in the Middle East, centered in the area of Israel, Jerusalem, and will be primarily in the Middle East, although the ripple effects of his influence and power and economic impact will be felt worldwide. That there will be some areas that will be more greatly impacted than others. For instance, we're told when he comes down into Egypt and Libya and Ethiopia are at his steps or under his realm, and he goes into the beautiful land of Israel. He establishes his palace or tabernacle or headquarters in Jerusalem. He hears rumors from the north, and he's concerned about it, which indicates to me that he doesn't have absolute control or absolute power all over the world. There's other influences in the world. Maybe it's Russia that will be coming down at that point. If we're talking about him coming out of Turkey, maybe it's Russia to the further north that will come down and he'll be concerned. Maybe China from the east, there's concerns that are there that you have other influences coming. So the hottest flames of persecution and difficulty, I believe, are going to be obviously centered in Jerusalem and Israel and throughout the Middle East. But will he have absolute control throughout the world? I don't know. I question that. So that goes to the issue of what America's role will be. Maybe America will be in a similar situation where we will come against the things that he's trying to do. Maybe we're included in the Bible talks about the ships of Tarshish, these merchant ships that are from elsewhere in the world. So maybe America, I hope not, but maybe our influence and our power and economy will diminish by that time and we won't have the ability to have much say in what takes place. I don't know.